And Ivan Raiklin has definitely been on the inside. He served 25 years as both lieutenant colonel and a Green Beret. But the moment the Pentagon started promoting vax mandates and equity training, he retired.
All right, if you were talking to Trump, Ivan, and he listens to you, I know, and so does Capitol Hill, if you had 2 minutes to talk to Trump, what would you say to him?
Ivan Raiklin, yeah. Deep state marauder. No, he's not retired. He just started that job. Yeah.
Ivan Raiklin. I only love to talk to geniuses. He's mind-boggling in that the information he can contain.
Ivan, if you don't know who he is, you're going to know who he is.
On December 23rd, President Trump retweeted a memo from an individual named Ivan Raiklin entitled Operation Pence Card.
Here's the kind of guy Ivan is. You got all these crazies with the sign. It's a coup. Trump's a fascist. Ivan will get right up in their face, okay?
Hey, Dr. Walensky, Ivan Raiklin, I really look forward to you testifying about your involvement in murdering 38,000 Americans due to the jab. Hey, Tony, are you sad that you're in the number 3 spot as it applies to murdering people throughout the entire world after Stalin and Hitler? So what do you think about being a defendant in Nuremberg 2.0?
Would you be disappointed if 12 months from now somebody hasn't been hung for treason or executed for treason?
I think the nation will be furious if that doesn't happen. Mr. Raskin, do you still want Civil War conditions?
Ivan Raiklin.
My good friend from Virginia, Ivan Raiklin.
Ivan Raiklin.
Ivan Raiklin, quite a disruptor, to put it lightly. He's a guy that speaks his mind. He's very open and honest, talking about where's the country at, Department of Retribution, or what's happening with the Epstein files.
Ivan Raiklin.
Of Ivan Raiklin, such an amazing analyst. He's an intelligence community professional. He's been a lawyer.
Something that Ivan has done called the Deep State Target List.
Ivan Raiklin has the distinction of being investigated by the Biden administration more than President Trump for putting America first and wanting honest transparency in our government.
Ivan Raiklin, topics that he covers are police state investigator or sleuth, and he studies this at a level of detail that very few people do. I like the word marauders. It suggests a certain kind of ferocity.
Our Secretary of Retribution is back.
Hey, Mr. Lowell, how you been?
Joining us now, Ivan Raiklin.
They've investigated me 20 times over, and you know what that does? That means I and my teams investigate those individual agents that are investigating me. And in the process, I red pill them as they listen to me. And then while they're doing that, I'm identifying dirt on them, their family. I know everything about these individuals, and I have dirt on every single one of them. Mr. Miller, can you say it's a strategic blunder also of the COVID-19 jab?
Hey Nancy, who ran the Fedsurrection parliamentary coup on January 6th? When you and Paul Irving were running that op in order to conduct a coup d'etat on the 2020 election, you and Mike Pence certified an illegal 2020 election. You, Paul Irving, your sergeant at arms, who used to be the sergeant at arms for Paul Ryan, as well as Speaker of the House John Boehner.
I can't say that.
Cannot disrupt.
Okay. So if you don't want to be fucked with, don't fuck with me.
So men that are listening, get the fuck off the couch and start coming after these fucking scum.
Ivan something, right?
Oh yeah, Ivan Raiklin.
Yeah,
the MAGA marauder. Yeah. But then you meet him, and it's like,
Bang. Shots fired. Pain is what you desire. If the pen is mightier than the sword, then how do we get here, my God? My God. If history is dead and gone, then how did we get here, my God? My God. So you wanna start a war?
Ivan Raiklin here, the Secretary of Retribution, America's Secretary of Retribution. No affiliation to any political party, nor any incumbent or previous administration. Having said that, I have today as a guest that's going to help give a little bit of context and insight as it applies to how the Fedsurrection could have taken place, if you agree that it was a Fedsurrection, and FBI's potential role and the relationship between the FBI, particularly the Washington Field Office, as it relates to the U.S. Capitol Police, the Capitol Police Board. And I can't think of anybody better to be able to provide that level of context because the only individual that would know kind of both sides of that coin, of the FBI's coin and their role in interacting with the U.S. Capitol Police, is our guest today, John Wandolo. And if you want to look him up, basically, here's what I found about you, and you can fill in some of the blanks that are relevant to today's discussion. You spent, what, 12 years at the FBI?
Yes, a little over that, yeah.
Worked at the Washington field office, worked counterterrorism, and more importantly, you were the liaison between FBI's Washington field office and the United States Capitol Police.
That's correct.
Boom. Anything else you want to add that's going to be relevant to our conversation?
It'll probably come up. I mean, the fact of being this SWAT team commander for the SWAT team leader for the FBI's Washington field office plays into it as it relates to the tactical side. But I think more importantly, the other stuff is probably more relevant.
Okay. So I want to start off with big picture, essentially what the FBI kind of is in the task organization, where you would fit in your role as the liaison from FBI to U.S. Capitol Police. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Tell me if you can see. And it goes into FBI's website. It talks about leadership.
I can see that.
So at the top, we have the director and then 2 deputy directors who've the first time in the history of the 100 and almost 20-year history of the FBI, right? That you have 2 deputies.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
That just doesn't make sense, but a lot of things the FBI does not make sense. So having 2 deputy directors is just one in a sea of things that make no sense.
Gotcha. Now, again, I'm going to start with headquarters, and then we're going to transition over to the WFO for context. So any of these particular offices, Office of the Deputy Director, Director, Associate Deputy Directors that are listed here, are there any names in particular that come to mind that would have a role in essentially planning for and knowing what would be taking place between FBI assets, whether it's actual, govies, contractors, CHSs, CIs, et cetera, any and all categories? Would any of these individuals, let me zoom it in. Would any of these play a role? Maybe all of them do, but if you
I think the Office of Congressional Affairs and the Office of General Counsel, they're depending on the current, not only the law, but FBI policy and DOJ policy. They're very attorney heavy with regard to approvals. And this is, by the way, I want to bring this up because I see this and saw this in the last 20 years in the military as well. I've seen general officers say this, and I've seen special agents in charge of field offices say this, where there'll be a significant decision to be made, and the boss will look to the attorney and say, well, if it's okay with him, it's okay with me. Well, that's crap. That's not leadership.
Right.
If you read the title, it's the Office of General Counsel. They provide legal counsel, just like in the military, just like in DOD, just like in the civilian government, just like in the private sector. Major corporations and small companies have lawyers to provide counsel, but they're not the boss.
No, I agree with that statement. Absolutely. I mean, it's not even a matter of debate, to be honest. I mean, the commander, you were a Marine. I didn't mention that, but I guess you were also a Marine. I won't hold that against you, but because you became a patriot afterwards,
I am a
basically
Marine.
A whistleblower.
Present tense, always.
Well, I'm a retired Green Beret in that case.
That's right. I get it.
So the general counsel, we're looking at here, one of the names that was in that position, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent because I think it's important since we're stressing on the general counsel, was a guy by the name of James Baker. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And James Baker was the general counsel that was the one that authorized, like you said, to the FBI director at the time, James, I like to call him Homie Comey at the time, where he said, oh, go ahead and illegally spy on a presidential candidate, to include all of his ecosystem, whether it's Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, Paul Manafort, General Flynn. I'm sure you know very intimately that situation. Now, what was the last year you were at the FBI? When did
So
you?
I was recruited out of the FBI at the end of 2008 into the Department of Defense by a guy named Rich Higgins.
Yeah.
Rich, the short story is I had been working for almost over 3 years with a guy named Stephen Coughlin, who had worked for General Pace when he was the chairman of the Joint
Peter
Chiefs.
Pace. Yep.
Great,
First
great,
Marine, right?
great Marine officer, but just a good leader, still is, in my opinion. And I had met Steve because the director of intelligence, by the way, for the Capitol Police, had called me, a guy who I had met when I was a liaison. Very, by the way, Army Ranger, solid guy. And he called me one day because he understood, he had sat through some of the trainings I had given at the Washington Field Office on the Islamic threat. And he called me and said, there's a guy up here teaching what you teach, but he's coming at it from a different perspective. So that's 2005. I met Steve Coughlin and we began working together, and Rich Higgins recruited both of us basically to create a small 2-man unit inside the DOD, inside of regular warfare, to combat the Islamic and communist movements in the United States. But I share that because I left the Bureau and continued the work that I'd been doing. And again, it's another kind of connector to the Capitol Police. It was very good because when Rich, and for your listeners or viewers that are not aware, Rich Higgins became the Director of Strategic Planning for the National Security Council under the first Trump administration. And in my opinion, was able to articulate inside the DOD and inside the government to senior leaders the real threat of the communist and Islamic movements, which directly have impact on this discussion with regards to January 6th. So I was in the FBI till December 2008, recruited out into the DOD and worked there essentially until Mr. Obama defunded it.
So you left immediately after the FBI immediately after Obama's election in 2008.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. All right. So then going back, we're talking about general counsel. The reason why I want to highlight that is during the reign of terror of Obama, you had the general counsel, towards the end of it, you had the general counsel, James Baker, that did the authorization for the Crossfire Hurricane illegal Russia hoax spying operation on behalf of the deep state. But then later on, he ended up going to be the #2 lawyer at Twitter 1.0 to run that censorship industrial complex. Is that your understanding of the
Same
situation?
guy. Yep. And that is my understanding. So a couple of things I'd just like to throw on the table again for your viewers. Excuse me. I like to point out so people are clear, these things, when we talk about ideological drivers in the war, Islam, communism, and there are other drivers, but they are the two most prominent because at the ground level across the United States, and this is true in North America and in Europe too, but we'll just focus on the US. At the ground level, it's the leaders and members of the communist and Islamic movements that where the rubber meets the road, they're getting it done. All that is nefarious. So whether it's in Washington, D.C. or Phoenix, Arizona or Dallas, Texas or Wichita, Kansas or Portland, Oregon or wherever, in those local communities, they are jihadi organizations and leaders working with communist organizations and leaders to get whatever it is they're doing, which is obviously to advance their movements. But whatever particulars they're doing in that community are being done by those people. And I say that because a lot of Americans, a lot of patriots get wrapped around the axle about all these other things like the World Economic Forum or the United Nations or the secular humanist movement and all these things. And those are all threats to liberty, no doubt. But the people actually getting it done at the local level are the members of the communist and Islamic movement. And again, I'm saying it because it plays into January 6th and it plays into the broader war. So on that note, it's worth noting that in October of 2003, James Comey gave an interview in New York Magazine. And at the time, he was leaving his position as the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, one of the, arguably, I would argue, the most important U.S. Attorney's office in the United States, specifically as it relates to counterintelligence and counterterrorism investigations. And he was going to be the number 2, the Deputy Attorney General for the United States at the Department of Justice. And in the interview, he said, I'd moved from being communist to whatever I am now. I'm not really sure. So why do I bring
I remember
this up?
that. I remember. Yep.
He admits he was, according to him, a communist, but he's not really sure where his anchor is at the time. That's, by the way, 22 years ago. And if we had a functional Department of Justice, a functional counterintelligence apparatus in the United States, that day that article was published, a counterintelligence investigation would have been launched, and he certainly wouldn't be serving as the number 2 at the time of the Department of Justice as the Deputy Attorney General. He certainly would not have been the FBI director, which he became later. But it's interesting to note that.
And what year was that?
That was October 2003. So
okay, I'd like to play. Actually, you know what? I'd like to play a clip from Mike Pence's own book called "So Help Me God," and I'm not sure if you heard this before. It's about 30 seconds.
Okay.
And I want you to, if you've heard it before, that's fine. But if this is you hearing it for the first time, I want to get your reaction. It might be a little shocking, but maybe not. So let's take a look here as we play a clip in his own words, Mike Pence's own words, and you'll hear a name Comey referenced as we go ahead and play this. Let me make sure that the sound is activated. All right, you able to see that?
Yep.
In 2003, I authored a bill that brought me into contact with a rising U.S. attorney from New York named James Comey. Comey had led the investigation, and when he appeared on the evening news soon after the arrest, complimenting the new law and commending me by name, my son Michael happened to be watching. "Dad, you got the bad guy," he told me when I walked through the door that evening. In Washington, I made many great friends and found common cause with colleagues from all walks of life, named James Comey.
So what do you think?
In
2003.
Birds of a feather.
Isn't that quite appropriate to bring that in?
Yeah. Well,
this is in his own words. Mike Pence is lauding James Comey at the same time that you're talking about his political affiliation with communism.
Right. Communism.
Right?
Right.
And yet Comey is at the Southern District of New York. Mike Pence in 2003 is essentially at that point in time, I think, finishing up his freshman year as a congressman. And this book is written by Mike Pence after January 6th. And he has the gall to laud this guy, James Comey.
Right.
I mean, what are your
it just tells me, again, I have a very low opinion of Mr. Pence. When he was a governor of Indiana, and Steve Coughlin and I were working quite a bit in Indiana, training police at the state and local level, National Guard, specifically on the Islamic threat. And we were working. I was working with the leadership of the State House in Indiana, and Pence wouldn't meet with us, and we were told by people that were legislators and others that knew him that he didn't want to touch the issue. And that just, over the years, what I learned is men and women in positions of authority that didn't want to actually address real threats had no regard for their oath of office, because the constitutional oath doesn't say protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, when it's comfortable for you. You swear an oath to do it no matter what. And I just found him to be cowardly and unfit for office. So when all of this transpired, first of all, when he was picked to be the vice president for Mr. Trump, and I did do interviews about this, my initial professional opinion was that he was there to muzzle Trump and to interfere with Mr. Trump and whatever he was going to try and do. That Mike Pence was not a patriot in my professional opinion. And as it turns out, he took actions in my professional opinion that were detrimental to the constitutional republic.
Yeah, you're being very kind. Roger Stone calls me the president of the Mike Pence fan club, and in the a tweet that he wrote later on said, I have mercy for all people, but I would like to see Mike Pence sharing a cell with Ivan Raiklin because he will get what he deserves. Something along those lines. I'm not a fan. Let's just say very diplomatically.
Yeah.
Now let's going back to the FBI headquarters. If we go and take a look at the Office of the Assistant Directors. So you talked about General Counsel, you talked about Congressional Affairs. One name that comes to mind is, see here, Mr. Marshall Yates. And if you recall, he was actually the individual that was working with Thomas Massey as a staffer, really going into the pipe bomber investigation, as far as I know. You know anything about Mr. Yates?
I don't. He's somebody I don't have background on for this discussion.
Okay.
I will just say the reason I mentioned the Office of Congressional Affairs is the way it's supposed to work in the Bureau is, nothing, the Bureau's interaction with members or staffers on the Hill goes through that office.
This office. And that would include you as the liaison. Were you reporting directly to this?
No. I mean,
office?
I reported to my supervisor at the Washington Field Office and to the chain of command in the FBI. The role of my role and anyone's role serves as the liaison for the FBI to the U.S. Capitol Police, which is a position that is filled by someone at the Washington Field Office. So there's only one.
Okay.
And it was a number of things, but primarily.
And I guess just real quick, what would be that chain of command from WFO to then ultimately land on the OCA?
So with regards to that, we would only keep them informed if we thought the particular matter needed to be informed. If we opened a case, they would be referenced or copied on the communications, but I did not. Very rarely would I do any direct liaison with the Office of Congressional Affairs unless DOJ felt like it was appropriate. So the way it would work is that the Capitol Police has an absolutely tremendous threat unit that looks at threats to cabinet members, the president, vice president, members of Congress. Now, of course, president, vice president, Secret Service, Supreme Court justices, that's the purview of the Supreme Court police. But my job was primarily all threats to basically all senior government officials. So I worked with Supreme Court, and we actually arrested a guy for threatening to kill the Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time. That was way back in 2004 or 5. But members of the cabinet, the vice president, president, and members of Congress.
So you have constant interactions, synchronization meetings, et cetera, planning, et cetera, to mitigate threat for the vice president particularly, right? Because the vice president also dual-hatted as the president of the Senate, correct?
Correct.
Also with Dignitary Protection Division leadership of the U.S. Capitol Police?
Yes.
Because they're charged with protecting the top 9 leaders of the bicameral, bipartisan legislative branch?
Yeah. So basically any threat
and any
public official.
Supreme Court marshals.
Right, Supreme Court. And so what's interesting is, so the individual threat units, the Secret Service, the Capitol Police, Supreme Court, for example, you get threats daily. But a lot of people just, they'll put something out on something. They'll send a letter. They'll make a phone call to the office, like, you need to be thrown in the river, or you need to be,
Right.
And so there's a whole, without going too in detail, there's an entire matrix of what we would look at to determine if this was a credible threat and if we actually
Right.
needed to follow up. So then there is something here. What's the next step? And so the leadership of the threat units would give me a call and say, okay, I'd go over there several times a week and sit down with them. And
When
look
you
at-
say them, you're referring to Protective
in this case,
Services Bureau?
I'm talking to the Capitol Police Threat Unit. Yeah.
Would that
And
be under Protective Services Bureau and probably also in coordination with maybe Intel and Interagency Coordination Division?
oh, absolutely. The Intel office was directly connected to that. They worked directly to that with them. And as I said earlier, I mean, I'd already worked with those guys because I'd trained some of them specifically on the jihadi threats.
Okay. So looking at the leadership team, did some names here come to mind? Or let's pull this up. I'll bring up the task org. I'm not sure if you can see it. You have.
Yeah, that's a little hard to see, but I'm
I'm gonna go ahead and
lean in a
zoom it
little.
in. So you got the Office of the Chief up here, some of the senior staff, and then the Office of Training, Protective and Intel Operations probably here, and then Uniform Services
Right.
on the
So-
right.
So,
you have
right,
the
the
Intel Services
assistant
Bureau.
chief for right, that's exactly right. And you see that they all work together. So the security services is congressional security. Those are the uniformed and suit wearing security for Capitol Police. And again, my experiences with those guys was always very positive. I mean, we worked with and trained with the U.S. Capitol Police tactical units, the uniform guys. I just thought they were always professional. And when I saw, my experiences, as you know, I was at the Capitol outside on January 6th, and
Right.
my experiences with, again, it wasn't the entire body. It was, specific people in leadership and specific people in certain positions that I think not only failed, but intentionally took actions that were, in some cases, criminal.
Do some of these names ring a bell based on your? We got Sean
I mean,
Gallagher here.
I never worked with any of these folks.
What about
But
Thomas DeBias,
yeah.
the general counsel?
Yeah. I just think the way that, again, when you're dealing with these organizations, when something negative happens, the natural response, and I say this is true in the private sector, is everyone, you circle the wagons and you protect the organization. Good leaders want to get to the truth and ferret out what actually happened, and if somebody in their organization needs to be, awarded for great effort or punished for a poor effort, then that's what happens. But again, I would say, if I could step back and just put this on the table, my experience in the last 20 some years that I've been doing this work inside and outside the government is, when people ask again about any of these issues, what's the problem? The problem is this, the way these organizations communicate, or the problem is, on the intelligence side and the counterterrorism side, we do this, or these people. I mean, the problem is leadership. For instance, all the information and evidence exists to do the right thing. You brought up, when we talk about FBI leadership, when we talk about the Russia hoax, the evidence that's on the table right now, and I mean evidence, facts and evidence, is that the senior leadership of the U.S. government, to include President Obama, President Biden, Mrs. Clinton, at the Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, and the Assistant Secretary of State for Ukrainian Affairs, and a whole bunch of other people.
Don't forget him.
John
Brennan.
Podesta, and all these people were literally working with Ukrainian security officials, intelligence officials, and politicians to help Mrs. Clinton in the election and hurt Mr. Trump in violation of numerous federal laws, which could include violations of the Espionage Act, sedition, and other things. And the fact that nobody is in prison for this, just like the fact James Comey was a communist, admitted he was a communist, and still became the number 2 at
He's
DOJ.
still roaming freely, treasoning.
Still roaming freely. And here's the point. That to me, and hopefully to your viewers, is all the evidence you need, besides everything else that's out there, of the gross corruption of the federal government, and the treason. Because this is,
I don't want to go into too much in depth on that aspect, because
but I'm laying it on the table because the things you are going after, if people think that I still on social media and people that interact with me and my work are still people like, what's it going to take for DOJ to do? I'm like, what don't you get? Nothing is going to happen. This is not going to get fixed at the federal level.
All right, so pause on that note. So what I want to focus in on is, I think you understand it just as well as I do. We've experienced, at least in the most recent history, 11 years of treason, and there's been phases to it, and there's been escalatory upon escalatory cover-ups. And one of the key, most egregious cover-ups to the previous transgressions dating back to 2014 is the actual January 6th op, if you will, right? And so because of your unique position, I mean, there's no one better suited than you on the planet to be able to contextualize what I'm hoping we can get to, because you're limited on time. Is I wanted to share this right here once again. And you talked about how you're the liaison from Washington field office. Let me just contextualize here. So you can see the map, right?
Yes.
So for those watching this, the FBI Washington field office is in between 3rd and 4th Street Northwest. And when you look at the legal framework, such as from Title II of the United States Code, Section 1967B1, it lays out the jurisdiction zone, the extended jurisdiction zone of the United States Capitol Police with the Metropolitan Police Department. So if you take this statutory framework, 2 U.S.C. Chapter 29, Section 1967, the law enforcement authority of the U.S. Capitol Police, and you read through it, and you place it on a map, it's going to look something like this. There's 2 jurisdiction zones. B1 is here on the right, and then B2 is on the left. We're not going to go into that. But if you look at it, it actually extends and abuts literally the other side of the street. Right here is the limitation of U.S. Capitol Police. And so that might, do you think that that's one of the reasons why WFO covers down on it? And in addition to having the jurisdiction over D.C. and several counties of Northern Virginia, whereas the headquarters is more of an, it's a headquarters element versus an operational element?
Right. So I guess it would be good to, I appreciate you showing the law on in 1967.
Yeah, right here.
Because the jurisdiction of FBI offices is through FBI headquarters. That is something that's internal to the FBI, which office is going to cover what area of the country. So for instance, there is an FBI Richmond field office.
Right.
And there's the DC field office. Where the line is, where the 2 offices, where the jurisdiction ends for one and begins for the other, that's up to the FBI. The FBI has determined that. So to your question, it's really the second part of what you were asking. It's really the FBI's jurisdiction, and the FBI Washington field office covers, as you said, significant part of Northern Virginia and the Washington, D.C. area. And technically, the Baltimore field office and the local RAs, the resident agencies, cover Maryland, but we would often, those areas of Maryland that directly abut to Washington, D.C.'s, we did operations in there. And all we needed to do was let the other, jurisdiction know. So it's not like it's a black and white line as it comes to this is how the FBI policy is, but it's not the same as, Section 1967, where that's a law.
Got it. And so just going back here, as you were speaking, I highlighted here, DC, Washington field office covers Washington, D.C., the city of Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, city of Fairfax, Falls Church, Fauquier. These are all Northern Virginia counties. And there's that resident agency down in Northern Virginia, or in Manassas.
Correct.
Now, it's funny because I live in Fairfax County, and so I was obviously a target of this office, and I have evidence and proof of it based on subpoenas that were finally publicly released. I was never indicted of anything, but the investigations ensued and escalated, and I was able to fight it pre-indictment because I know the system very well, and I essentially applied the necessary motivation and informed those that were investigating me that I would not be quite the easy target, and all of their ducks would have to be in a row for them to even bring it forth. Luckily, I had that knowledge and the relationships to inform folks legally that you better be doing this extremely by the book. And because they had to do it by the book, I never met that predicated threshold. Learning from the experience of the weaponization that occurred to General Flynn, learning from the experience of the weaponization against all the J6ers and everybody else during the last few years, and as well as President Trump, I was able to kind of leverage and push back against that, thankfully.
Right.
Now, again, the jurisdiction here, it's only a few blocks, if you will, right? Up here is the FBI Washington field office, and down here is the United States Capitol, okay? Now, one thing I also wanted to mention was what relationship and interactions did you have in your role as a liaison between FBI and USCP with the MPD, Metropolitan Police Department? Because although U.S. Capitol Police's jurisdiction extends up to almost your offices there at WFO, the streets are still policed by the Metropolitan Police Department. So was there an interaction there?
Always. And that was true for whatever violation we were working. So it came down to, it just depends on the case. Like tactically speaking, when I was in leadership positions in the Washington FBI SWAT team, we supported, for instance, certain events at the Capitol. And we would coordinate with numerous agencies. We actually supported presidential movements on occasion when it warranted, the inauguration, things like that. And those are things that the coordination is massive between, as you can imagine. There are numerous, and for people that don't know this, I mean, there are so many law enforcement organizations in Washington, D.C. That the Smithsonian Police, I mean, but you just things you don't think about.
I think it's 22 different.
It's a lot. It's a lot, and I think it's too many. But that's
let's cover a few of them. I'm not sure if let me see here. Let me go back to sharing the screen. Can you see this? Fedsurrection, January 6, 2021.
Sure.
And let's just zoom in. I'm gonna make a big picture here. Let's start with the top left. Work our way down, and then we'll move I guess the top part, and then we're going to work our way down. So I made this and built this slide in the hopes that I would be speaking with you for you to, as well as hopefully eventually publicly, I'll have an interview with Chief Stephen Sund to shed even more light on some of this. But the way I understand it, reading 2 USC chapter 29 and the framework upon which who is responsible for what related to January 6th, it's the Capitol Police Board is literally the judge, jury, executioner on behalf of the Speaker's office and the Senate the leader of the Senate, all right? in determining who has what law enforcement capability and what happens in the decision-making process as part of that. Because you're familiar with the Capitol Police Board, right?
That's correct. Yep.
The Capitol Police Board.
What you just said that's pretty much true. That's their jurisdiction. They have the final say over all these things. Yeah.
Right. So the Capitol Police Board consists of 3 members, voting members, and 1 non-voting member. The 3 voting members are the House Sergeant at Arms here on the left, the Senate Sergeant at Arms on the right, and then an architect of the Capitol he was teleworking on January 6th. Okay. So he's kind of out of the picture. So if you get the agreement of those 2 sergeants at arms, that's 2/3 of the Capitol Police Board. And then they dictate what happens related to law enforcement and they dictate to the chief of the Capitol Police, that non-voting member. So again, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi on January 6th, it directs her Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, who, by the way, was the Sergeant at Arms for Paul Ryan before her, and John Boehner before Paul Ryan, as context. And then as you go to the right, because of that concurrent jurisdiction, outside of the Capitol, rests, especially the streets, rests with the DC Metropolitan Police Department. You can, by extension, say that it's the mayor of DC, Muriel Bowser, and her chief at the time, Robert Conti, that essentially were the ones that made decisions related to any and all law enforcement non-action, inaction, or action that day. Would you agree?
Well, it depends. If you're talking about on the Capitol grounds, then that's the Capitol Police's jurisdiction. I do want to make a finer point, because you're bringing up a good point here. Number one, on days when the Capitol Police realizes like something comes up that they were not well prepared for or whatever, that's normal in police work. Something happens and you need more bodies. They can ask concurrent jurisdictions like MPD or whatever to assist them. But for instance, I do want to clarify, like if the president goes up to Capitol Hill for the State of the Union or something, then all of a sudden the Secret Service has a say and will often strong arm. I'm going to use that term without trying to be, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, just they're going to say, look, for the president coming, here's what we need. And usually there's a good working relationship and those things happen. So, but you got to remember, there in that case, you've got Secret Service, you've got Capitol Police, for instance, you've got Metropolitan Police providing escorts across DC to help with the presidential motorcade. I mean, there's so many moving parts in these things. But what I sense that you're trying to get at is who's got the final authority. And the reality is on January 6th, with regards to the Capitol and the surrounding property, that's all Capitol Police property and their jurisdiction. Their jurisdiction.
Got it. Yeah. Another finer point. That's one thing I need to add in here is Secret Service. That's a very good point, because you got to remember that during the joint session, the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, in his role as President of the Senate, and then in his role as the presiding officer of the joint session, is inside of both the Senate chambers during the objections and in the House chambers as presiding officer.
Correct.
And my question to you is, it is extremely nuanced, and it's kind of like hypotheticals. I don't think anybody really thought through this. Understanding the legal framework of the Electoral Count Act coupled with the law enforcement authority that we just laid out with 2 U.S.C. 1967 and the inner workings, you're probably the only one that can answer this, is when the vice president goes into the Senate, who has primacy? His Secret Service detail or his now Senate Sergeant at Arms, because he's in the Senate chambers?
Okay, so that is a great question. It is kind of nuanced, but it's not. So the Secret Service has overall authority for the security of the people they're protecting. And in this case, the Vice President of the United States. It's their primary responsibility. They will conduct liaison prior to, during the Vice President's arrival with the Sergeant at Arms, Capitol Police uniform, Capitol Police plainclothes guys, all of that. And once the parties, the individuals, all get to know each other, like the individuals, the Secret Service agents that primarily work on the vice president's detail,
Right.
the primary guys that are working with or around the sergeant at arms, then it becomes not just, it's like they all know each other, and they become, so they
But
can
strictly from a textbook legalistic nuance.
the
If this is
Secret Service
litigated,
has responsibility for the man, the sergeant at arms has responsibility for the location.
got it. So the way I understand it is that once the vice president enters the Senate chambers, the Secret Service protects his physical being, but everything around there, they do that under the jurisdiction of the Senate Sergeant at Arms.
In coordination with, yes.
Okay. So at that time, it was the chief, or excuse me, Michael Stenger was the Senate Sergeant at Arms that day. And he was also the Capitol Police Board chair, because every year it rotates annually between the two sergeants at arms. And on that year, starting on January 3rd of 2021, the odd years, the Senate Sergeant at Arms takes that chair of the Capitol Police Board role I wanted to put that out there. Now, once the vice president changes his role, he has this is the only constitutional actor that has dual branch authorities. The vice president, coupled with his role as the senior person in the Senate when he takes the role of the president of the Senate, but also has a third role once every 4 years where he's now the presiding officer, totally distinct and separate from those first two, because now he's inside of the House chambers, not as a vice president, not as a Senate president, but as a presiding officer. And so in that role, he's the senior individual representing the joint session. So my question now, it's another more nuanced one, is in that role, because he's in the House chambers, what does his, he basically now has 3 bubbles of security potentially, right? Because he has that triple role. But because he's in the House chambers, is he now the senior officer above Nancy Pelosi's House Sergeant at Arms? It's an academic question.
That is actually interesting, and I don't know the answer to that, actually. I would say this, constitutionally, he's presiding over this electoral process.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually have to look that up to see if in his role he's acting as the president of the Senate as the presiding officer.
No, it's a separate.
I believe it is a separate officer, but I actually wouldn't swear to that. If you're saying, for a fact it's a complete third thing, and we go with that, then it would be the same. The Secret Service is protecting the man, and then the sergeant at arms in the House is responsible for the physical location and the protection of that.
And so if that's the case, again, it's an academic question, because I don't think it's ever been addressed. And we got close to it when there was remember when Jack Smith had brought in Mike Pence to his grand jury?
Right.
Some of that argumentation was brought up, but not in this level of specificity and nuance, because at the end of the day, the vice president is a dual branch individual. And then on that one day, sometimes it only takes an hour or two, they're in this third constitutional role as the presiding officer. And I don't think most people think about it in that level of specificity. But I think as we start to further dig into January 6th, I think that's going to play a very crucial role on assessing or doing an after action review on Mike Pence's role. At best case scenario, I think he is probably more complicit in that op. But best case scenario, those are nuances that are going to have to be, I guess, not litigated, maybe in the court of public opinion, but maybe even litigated. Does that make sense?
I do. And I think, Ivan, part of what this whole, and I don't want to call it an incident is to minimize it. This was a color revolution against the people of the United States by the President of the United States. um, meaning Mr. Biden, by Joe Biden, I should say. This was a takeover, and I think the fact that just recently, in the arrest of the suspect, the alleged suspect of the January 6th pipe bomb case, what I saw in both normally conservative as well as the mainstream, traditional mainstream media, is going back to calling January 6th either an insurrection by Trump supporters or something similar to that, words that are similar to that, phrases that are similar to that, despite the fact the evidence demonstrates that's not what happened. And I think it, to me, demonstrates that the establishment Republicans and the Democrat Party still control the high ground in the narrative war, and pretty much completely, because we're still calling January 6th an insurrection instead of a revolution conducted by the Democrat leadership in conjunction with the Republican establishment that includes Mike Pence. And the evidence, I mean, there are several people, I would say among them, probably Paul Sperry has been the best investigative reporter on this, but numerous detailed articles with all the receipts about the Russia, quote, the Russia hoax, Russia collusion, and a lot of these related issues. You've got real constitutional matters that have been discussed by guys like John Eastman, and I've testified in cases along with John Eastman, like the Alaska state legislature, state legislator who they tried to fry for being a member of Oath Keepers and saying it necessarily should keep him out of office, even though he's being elected by a 30+ point majority in his state. I mean, these are seditious actions. They undermine the Constitution. They undermine the rule of law. And because the system, specifically at the federal level, I think it's true to a great extent at the state level, there is no righting the ship right now. The ship has still not been righted. We are still, in my opinion, in a post-constitutional republic. Or in a nation we're in a post-constitutional America. And I think not understanding that the enemy in this is just delaying and doing everything they can to delay Mr. Trump. I think this is part of the problem. I think Mr. Trump's greatest failure is not trying these people for treason and executing people that are found guilty of treason and sedition per the law. This is not inflammatory language. This is per the law. These people have, this is sedition. It's a revolution against the constitutional republic. And the fact that under the law, the way it's being handled, I think is extremely dangerous, because Americans soon will have to make decisions that they don't want to make with regard to their own liberty. And this is where we find ourselves. And that's why I think the questions you're asking, no matter how in the weeds people think you are, I think they're the very questions that go to the constitutional responsibility and the constitutionality of what happened on January 6th and the true nature of what that was. And I'll just make one more point. Chris Burgard, who's a Hollywood producer and all this, made 2 documentaries, Capital Punishment and The War on Truth, regarding January 6th, because he was there filming. And he didn't know. I've known Chris for a long time when he was doing stuff at the border. And I'm talking like back in 2006 and 2007, when we had first met, right after he did his documentary, The Border. And, he had been in Honduras during the color revolution there, and he was watching January 6th unfold. And after we realized that we were both there, he called me and said, this is exactly what I witnessed in Honduras when I was there on the ground as it was unfolding. And he said, do you strongly disagree with me? And I'm like, no, it's exactly what I witnessed. I mean, when I went back to my hotel room on January 6th, after being on the Capitol grounds right in front of the front steps, there as a part of a group that included people like Michelle Bachmann, and we were there to pray. And I was invited by pastors from the Dallas-Fort Worth area to pray. And I went back to my hotel room while, a lot of it was still going on. It had just gotten dark. And there is a banner, like an 8-foot by 4-foot banner, professionally made, about the quote insurrection. And of course, at the side of the banner was the violent communist group Rise and Resist. And they actually put their name on the banner. And I'm like, well, that banner wasn't just made in the last 30 minutes.
Right.
These are what we call investigative clues that something else is afoot here, and that this was a planned, coordinated event. And again, when you lay all the evidence on the table, and you look at it, in light of the revolutionary nature of not just January 6th, but the Russia collusion operation and all these other operations from George Floyd Ford, it paints a very serious picture. And this is what I do for a living, is look at these movements, the communist Islamic movement, and how these operations all fit together.
Perfect. So as everyone was focused on what was going on outside of the Capitol, my main focus on leading up to January 6th, on January 6th and after, was the parliamentary responsibility and maneuvering that should have taken place that day. So my role, I guess I can play this real quick. I'm not sure if you know, but I put forth a recommended course of action on January 6th to Kevin McCarthy and Mike Pence's chief of staff that they should vote on the objections by state delegation where the Republicans had the majority, if they were to vote by state delegation. And instead of that occurring, you saw the facilitated breach of the Capitol. And then the investigations into me launched. So I'm going to play a quick clip, if you can listen in, which sets the context for what I think happened for the next clip. So let's play this.
December 23rd, President Trump retweeted a memo from an individual named Ivan Reichlen entitled Operation Pence Card that called on the vice president to refuse the Electoral College votes from certain states that had certified Joe Biden as the winner.
States across the country that conducted their elections outside of how the state legislatures had approved them.
All right, so the J6 committee mentioned me in the tweet that President Trump retweeted, but that tweet was only applicable to December 23rd of 2020 as it relates to the Electoral Count Act and the vice president's role as the president of the Senate to send back to the states for correction, because the 39 states ran their elections under COVID rules as depicted here. Let me see here. And my argument was that he was obligated to send back at least to the 6 contested states for them to run an election according to the state's election law, which wouldn't have violated Article 2, Section 1 of the federal Constitution, abstain from sending electors, or have a joint session legislative vote in those 6 states. And he failed to do that. So that's where his problem started, right? But then on January 6th, I recommended that the adjudication be done through the normal Electoral Count Act process. But when it came time to vote on whether to object or not, to vote by state delegation, because that was more commensurate with, I think, the Federalist Papers, and I'm not going to go into all the nuanced details of that. But instead, what happened was there was not even a quorum that day on January 6th because of COVID rules. Keep in mind that on January 3rd, Nancy Pelosi was voted in as Speaker of the House with the entire House there, all 434 members at the time, since one was deceased. So you had 434, and she was voted in. But 3 days later, let's listen in to what she says.
Let us remind that each side, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, each have 11 members allowed to be present on the floor. Others may be in the gallery.
You hear that?
I did.
Only 11 members, House Republican, Democrat, or House Senate Democrat Republican. So even if we give her the maximum of what she meant by that, that means 11 Republican senators, 11 Democrat senators, 11 Republican House members, and 11 Democrat House members were allowed to be on the floor of the House as part of this joint session. Last time I checked, 22 out of 435 doesn't meet the 2/3 states requirement, and neither does 22 out of 100 meet the mandatory required quorum of 2/3 in the Senate when it comes down to this electoral college process as outlined in the 12th Amendment. So that right there, it wasn't even a quorum, like in your face. You have any thoughts on that? Did you know this, or am I saying this?
I do have a thought on that, and that is this: that again, House, not I'm going to use the word policy, but when the House votes on rules and how they're going to proceed, the Constitution is the final arbiter of these things. But like I said earlier when I was talking about, it's not a lack of facts, it's a lack of leadership. I think what happened on January 6th, it's not a lack of facts and evidence. The adversaries of liberty are in the positions of authority in the U.S. government.
Yep.
And that includes, and I want to make a statement because I think it directly applies to what you're asking. When people ask me in my line of work, which is primarily training and teaching and providing counsel to leaders, citizens, law enforcement, National Guard, military, intelligence professionals, and elected leaders about the communist and Islamic movements in the United States, I often say, when they ask, what do you think is the greatest threat? And I will say, I think the greatest threat is the Republican Party. It's the GOP. And when they ask, okay, explain yourself. Well, communists are doing what I expect communists to do. James Comey is doing what I expect guys like James Comey to do, who's a communist. And my assessment is
and John Brennan.
And John Brennan and all the rest of them. Barack Obama is doing what I would expect him to do, as is Joe Biden, who his very first election, the Council for a Livable World is a communist organization that directly supported his very first election, and he continued to thank throughout his career. Right
in 1972, they did?
Became president, and that is a Soviet communist organization created on the order of Stalin's spy chief. So the fact that I just think it's the lack of understanding by Americans on how grossly penetrated our system is by those intentionally acting on behalf of hostile foreign powers and hostile foreign movements. So when you look at that, communists are doing what communists do. Jihadis are doing what jihadis do. The party of Lincoln is supposed to be the bulwark for liberty, for the Constitution. But they're not. They are acting in ways that are directly contrary to the Constitution and the will of the people. And I think January 6th is just really the greatest example of that, but it's one of dozens of examples in the last 10 years of just a gross undermining and honestly a revolution against the American people by these hostile movements inside the United States.
Let's take a look here. So I'm going to continue this clip. This is what was going on inside of the chambers on January 6th as we all were diverted to focus on the Pelosi Fedsurrection externally.
This is at the guidance of the tending physician and the sergeants at arms.
So that rule that she said was the 11, 11, 11, 11, at the guidance of the sergeant, the attending physician, and the sergeants at arms. Last time, we just spent 20 minutes explaining that she is the senior person in the House of Representatives above the sergeant at arms. And she's saying that, at the guidance of the sergeants at arms and the attending physician, they're telling me due to COVID that we're not going to have a quorum. I don't know, last time I checked, you can't just violate the Constitution due to COVID.
That's
which they
right.
did, and you can't
Right.
violate the joint session and the 12th Amendment due to COVID. But yet they did.
That's right.
Let's go. Let's just start.
And guess what Mike Pence does? He takes over.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress, for what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Point of order, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. In order to follow with the Speaker's instructions that only a limited number of people be on the floor, may I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary inquiry in the future if you're not on the floor but in the gallery?
Under Section 18 of Title III of the United States Code, debate is not permitted in the joint session.
All right, so this guy right here is the Congressman Morgan Griffith from Virginia's 9th Congressional District, Southwest Virginia. He knows the rules, parliamentary rules, better than most people. And so he calls out the vice president, the presiding officer at this time, saying, hey, how are we going to even participate if most of us aren't even able to participate?
That's right.
To call anything out, not to debate, but to call out a procedural violation, meaning a constitutional violation. And Mike Pence, guess who whispers in his ear? Nancy Pelosi's parliamentarian whispers in Mike Pence's ear to say exactly what Mike Pence said. Under Title III U.S. Code Section 18, debate is not permitted. And this is what Morgan Griffith responds with.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'm not attempting to debate. I'm trying to find out how a parliamentary inquiry or a parliamentary point of order would be made in following with the Speaker's request that most of us not be on the floor. How do you make one of those points of order when you don't know what's going to happen later?
Respectfully, the gentleman's parliamentary inquiry constitutes debate, which is not permitted in the joint session under Section 18 of Title III United States Code.
Oh, that's right out of that. That's a lie.
So he considers a parliamentary inquiry or an objection to violating the Constitution as debate. And so the pompous presiding officer says that you can't speak, punk.
That's right. I mean, this is for people that still want to give Mike Pence the benefit of the doubt. I think I would just respectfully ask you to pull your head out of your backside. Fourth point of contact, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So this is just absurd. But this is just, again, one of the many things that happened on this day that allowed these leaders like Pence and Pelosi to obstruct the will of the people, the U.S. Constitution, in order to advance the color revolution. And
so
put Joe Biden I'm trying to unlawfully into office.
Exactly. And so that's kind of what I'm laying out in a short little clip here is that the president of the Senate, you saw how he acted with his sergeant at arms, the Metropolitan Police Department were working with the U.S. Capitol Police on that day. And then in addition to that, I've seen evidence that Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ryan McCarthy, the Secretary of the Army, and your beloved director, Christopher Ray Epps, as I like to nickname him, were all, and then the mayor, so not Chris Ray, but the mayor, some of the members of the U.S. Capitol Police, leadership, Pelosi, Milley, and McCarthy all said due to optics, we don't want to defend the Capitol, essentially. Why? My argument is that because when you don't have non-legislative, when you remove the non-legislative actors from defending the Capitol, that means she can unilaterally, through the sergeant at arms, allow for a breach to occur and say that, oh, we were trying to defend the Capitol, but we weren't able to. And now we can blame Trump, Secretary Miller, and everybody that they want to blame, to include the J6ers, for the quote unquote insurrection. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, I think you articulated that well. And I do want to say, I think it was a grave mistake of Mr. Trump not using his executive authority, which is much more significant than I think many Americans understand. You know, we're taught in school 3 separate and equal branches of government, and that's a lie. The founders never said that. The executive branch was meant to have significant and great authority I mean, and I'm a big believer it should go back to the Supreme Court used to be in the basement of the Senate, which is where it belongs, because they're not equal. The Congress and the Supreme Court are meant to take an unjust ruler, a tyrannical ruler like a president, the executive, and provide for a means to restrict, correct, and even if necessary, remove from office a tyrant. But not to have the Congress was never intended to have equal power to the executive branch. That is a lie, and it's still perpetrated in public schools today. And on that note, Mr. Trump could have taken significant action on January 6th, but chose not to. And based on everything we know now, I think it's because people around him who are batting for the other team advised him, the optics on this, if you do this, will look terrible for you. It'll look like you're conducting a military revolution to squash the electoral process. But he represents the American people, and he had a duty to do that, and he failed to do it. So I think there was a lot going on that day, and I know people say, well, it's easy to look back and in hindsight, well, that's not true. This was being talked about long before January 6th about what was coming, what was happening, and the things, the corrections that were still possible through legitimate constitutional process. And Mike Pence subverted it, and Nancy Pelosi subverted it, and Joe Biden subverted it in conjunction with Obama and Podesta and Brennan and the other usual suspects, and many other Republicans too. It's not just Mike Pence. Kevin McCarthy, I think, was complicit based on the totality of what we saw out of his behavior prior to and after. So I think, on that point on January 6th, this was not only a catastrophic, it wasn't a leadership failure. This was an intentional effort to undermine the will of the American people.
All right. You have about 5 minutes left, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do this real quick because I wanted to cover a couple more quick points. So I'm going to go ahead and share once again the map to lay things out. Keep in mind that when you look at this particular slide that I built off of the map of the jurisdiction of the U.S. Capitol Police, so it covers Union Station. Remember Clay Higgins said that there were FBI ghost buses over at Union Station?
Yes.
Which jurisdiction would those buses fall under if they're being operationalized in support of January 6th joint session events? Would they?
Well, I mean, they'd technically be under U.S. Capitol Police jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Because they're
police, and they would be. They would more likely than not be from which office? Like, who would be the on-scene commander from the WFO?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about if you were placing pipe bombs at the DNC and RNC? Who would have law enforcement jurisdiction to investigate and criminally charge you in this jurisdiction?
Depending on how they,
Capitol Police.
It's a Capitol Police jurisdiction. But like I mentioned earlier, when we would do those investigations, it was they were joint investigations. So, like with somebody making threats to the Supreme Court Chief Justice, when we did the raid.
But I guess who would have the authority to criminally make that charging decision? Would it be the General Counsel of the U.S. Capitol Police?
Yeah, see, that's a turf battle, but normally it would fall to one of the other, like to the FBI, to Secret Service. But
what I'm getting at is if the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, meaning Schumer and Pelosi, told the Chief of the U.S. Capitol Police and the general counsel of the U.S. Capitol Police to say, you know what? You're not going to charge, based on our authorities above you, the pipe bomber, nor are you going to charge Ray Epps, who was inside of the jurisdiction box of U.S. Capitol Police, nor are you going to look and investigate into the FBI ghost buses or anyone else that helped facilitate this Fedsurrection. Could they have that authority to do so?
Yes.
That's the
And it
bombshell
would
right
become,
there that everybody needs to understand.
and I've been in those meetings where, you know, and I'll just, you know, when I was an FBI agent.
That's this guy right here.
And
When we
saying-
talked about, we started this with general counsel and lawyers.
Yep.
This is the most powerful person and the one with the most information related to the January 6th Fedsurrection and cover up, as well as its weaponization, is this guy right here, in my opinion. The general counsel of the U.S. Capitol Police. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's you just kind of nailed it. I mean, I've been in those meetings where the people with the primary jurisdiction say, you know, we're not going to move forward on this. And can another agency say, well, we're going to prosecute anyway? You can, but it creates like a long-term goat rope and friction that, you know, when you're doing that kind of interagency stuff, you won't do. It just usually does not happen. So it's not to say there aren't, I mean, these things go on all the time where there are jurisdictional issues, especially in Washington, D.C., where there, we talked about before, many law enforcement agencies, many investigative agencies, but you still got to go through the same U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C.
Matt Graves at the time.
Yep. And, you know, they may say, look, they're saying don't prosecute it. We're not going to prosecute.
And the last question I have, I know you got to go. We went to this slide here. We talked about how Metropolitan Police Department also has that concurrent role. So the chief at the time was Robert Conti. When you look at what his whereabouts after he retired as the chief of Metropolitan Police Department, on April 27th of 2023, he was appointed as the assistant director of the Office of Partner Engagement at FBI headquarters. Is he in a position to influence everything related to what we just discussed?
Likely, yes. That certainly is a position where.
So he can really cover it up further if there were any transgressions or nefarious activity by the FBI and the Metropolitan Police Department in their supporting role of U.S. Capitol Police subversion that I call Fedsurrection.
It is certainly possible and likely, yes.
And so why is Kash Patel doing nothing to him, nor is he doing nothing to Jocelyn Ballantyne, who went after General Flynn unlawfully, went after the Proud Boys unlawfully on behalf of Pelosi, and now is the lead prosecutor against the so-called pipe bomber that the FBI did this massive press conference on Thursday?
That is a great question. And it's not just them. There is a lot of poisonous deadwood inside the FBI and the leadership that is yet to be purged. And I don't know what Mr. Patel is doing, but he doesn't seem to be proactively doing that. He has done some things. I mean, he's let some people go that need to be fired, but it's very bad inside the FBI.
Well,
still,
John, I really appreciate this. We only scratched the surface, and I think if you allow me, if we can do a follow-up, whenever you're available, because I still have quite a few questions that will go into further detail. And I think you're the only person on the planet that knows these nuances credibly and has the courage to lay it all out.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I just think this is not, like, from a professional standpoint, what we're talking about is not that controversial. It's only controversial because the leadership, especially Republican leadership, and especially leadership under Mr. Trump, the people that he's appointed to do some of these things, are not doing it. And
well, people like us are going to essentially, I would say we're going to motivate them to do it, because the truth is the truth. We're just here to shed light on it and send it out at scale. And luckily we have a big enough platform between the both of us to really get it out there to where it actually gets into the White House or to Cash or to these other folks to start making corrections. And they're going to have to do it. You know, it's painful, but they're going to have to do it.
Yeah, they sure are.
And then the last statute, 2 U.S.C. 1979, release of security information. It's the Capitol Police Board that decides what security information is released over to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia and who testifies on behalf of the U.S. Capitol Police. Do you think this was the authority that was used by Pelosi and Schumer to essentially send over false witnesses like David Lazarus against the Oath Keepers, Harry Dunn, Acanilo Ganell, and all the other U.S. Capitol Police officers that testified, to include the one that testified against Dominic Pizzola, one of the Proud Boys?
I would say this authority was definitely used to advance.
Again, and the general
going.
counsel was the one that advised on how to manipulate and skew it, right? It would have been.
Would have been. Yeah. In these discussions. None of this would have happened. None of these. I would doubt there were many, if any, meetings regarding this that were held that the general counsel himself wasn't sitting there.
And then the corollary is, what about the CCTV footage? Because it says authority of the board to release security information rests with the Capitol Police Board. And so if there was exculpatory video, that's why they held it for so many years. Right?
That's right.
All right.
And because it destroyed their narrative.
So this is why I see it, is that they use these two statutes in order to essentially protect the narrative unlawfully. And you can't FOIA, you can't Brady request the legislative branch. And the only way to get to the truth is, here's my recommendation. J.D. Vance, why don't you order your sergeant at arms as the president of the Senate to release all deliberative documents of the general counsel and all of his communications? And I think it'll expose it all.
That's right.
John, appreciate it. John Guandolo, U.S. FBI liaison to the United States Capitol Police. No one better to explain this than John Guandolo. Patriot, warrior, truth teller, and he's got courage.
Appreciate it.